Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. The Desperate Bride. Chapter 1. Nothing made Florence happier than the warm, golden sun on a perfect day. And to Florence, many days were perfect. In truth, it didn't matter whether it was sunny or snowing, rainy or windy, Florence had a zest for life, one that drew others to her naturally. Her father ensured her well-being, and everything she ever desired somehow landed in her lap. If it couldn't be found at the local mercantile, her father would have items shipped from Paris. Indeed, Florence often thought herself the luckiest girl in the world, or at the very least, the luckiest girl in the city of Boston. Florence had only experienced great sadness once, and she didn't even remember it properly. Her mother died when she was barely 3 years old, and ever since then, only she and her father lived in their grand estate, along with their servants, of course. Florence remembered only a few things about her mother. She remembered her scent, like lilacs after a fresh rainstorm, and she remembered her smile that seemed to light up the world. Her father often commented that Florence had a smile like that, bright enough to bring happiness on even the darkest days. He doted on her, making sure she had the best gowns, the best dolls, and the best education. As Florence grew older, he made sure she gave the best parties in town, with the help of his ample staff. Today, Florence was planning for her 5th party of the season, and she could barely contain her excitement. "I think," she said to Mary, the housekeeper, "that we should have those caramel apples again. And fresh fish for the meal. So many people spoke highly of it at my last party. And I will have to purchase a new gown or have one made, of course, but there is plenty of time for that." "Of course," Mary said, taking diligent notes. "Is there anything else, miss?" "No, that's perfect for now, thank you." Florence was always polite to the staff, for she had no reason not to be. They were as instrumental in her life as her father was. Mary was especially magical, seeming to find a way to fulfill Florence's every request on short notice. "Oh, and Mary, I think I'll take my tea in the garden this afternoon, unless my father has expressed a different plan." "Ah," Mary said, "your father actually sent a message earlier that he was going to lie down this afternoon. He wouldn't be joining you for tea." "Oh." Florence's brow furrowed. "Is he all right?" "I'm sure he is," Mary said and curtsied. "Will there be anything else?" "No, that's all," Florence said. "I'm sure I'll see father at dinner." It briefly crossed her mind to be concerned. It wasn't like her father to lie down for an afternoon nap. He was an energetic man, capable of achieving more in a single morning than most people were in a week. Still, Florence supposed that it would catch up with him now and again. After all, he was only human. She turned her attention to the book she had been poring over. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen was one of her favorite novels, and although Florence had read it several times, she always discovered something new when she opened it again. This time, she found herself falling even more in love with Mr. Darcy than during her previous readings. In truth, Florence found herself falling in love with many of the leading men in the books she read. When she was a child, she thought romance novels were silly. Of course, her father concurred, preferring that she spend her time reading Dickens and Carroll. But now that she was nearing 22 years of age, she found herself daydreaming as she read them. She often put herself in the heroine's place, picturing far-off adventures and whirlwind romances that ended in happily ever after. All of her experience with adventure came from books, of course. She had never been outside of Boston, although she eagerly ate up tales from visitors from afar, visitors who came to her father's house at his bequest. Whenever they regaled her with stories about their travels, she would sit with her hands on her chin, mesmerized. Maybe one day, she dreamed, she would see those places. Or maybe one day, she would meet the love of her life right there in Boston, and they would live out their days in her family home. She pictured her father with more gray hair than he had now, bouncing grandchildren on his lap. "Forgive me," Mary said, standing again at the door. "I don't mean to interrupt you, miss, but—" "You're not interrupting me," Florence assured her. "Can I help you with something? Did you need more details for the party?" "No," Mary said, and Florence picked up an odd note in her voice. "Is something wrong? Your father has asked for the doctor to be sent. I thought you would like to be informed." "Did he?" Florence asked, alarm now coursing through her. "What's the matter? Is he suffering? What are his complaints?" "He says his chest hurts and his stomach is giving him quite a bit of trouble," Mary relayed. "That is the information I've given to Thomas, who has gone to fetch Dr. Lorry. Your father says he's sure it's just something he ate, but I hope it is. But it's better to be safe than sorry." Florence closed her book and stood. "I shall go to him at once." "Yes, miss." Mary stepped out the way, and held out her hand for the book, which Florence handed over to her. "Thank you, Mary," Florence said, and then headed up the stairs quickly, only keeping herself from taking the stairs two at a time, which, no matter what the circumstances, would not be ladylike. She was sure that her father's malaise was nothing to be concerned about. He sometimes suffered indigestion, especially after breakfast. But her heart thudded with nervousness as she tried to remember a time when it had been so bad that he'd asked for a doctor. The upstairs hallway had light streaming into it, and the windows were open. She could hear the birds chirping, and the splash of the river nearby. Everything seemed as normal. But as she pushed open the door to her father's room, she saw by the expression on his face that everything was far from normal. "Oh, father," she said, trying not to show how worried she was at his pale features. "How are you feeling?" "Florence, dear." He tried to put a smile on his face, but it looked more like a grimace. "Everything is all right. Don't worry your pretty little head. But Mary said that you were unwell, and that you asked for the doctor." Florence moved closer. "I've never heard you ask for a doctor." "Just a little bit of pain," he interrupted her. "And I'd rather have the doctor fix me up so I can get back to work sooner rather than later." "Are you certain it's nothing serious?" She took a seat in the chair beside his bed, and this time when he smiled, it looked more genuine. "What are you up to this fine day? Surely, I've interrupted something wonderful." "I am planning the party," she said. "I've decided to order those caramel apples from the market stall. And the fresh fish was quite popular last time, so that's what we will have for the meal." "Wonderful," he said, hoisting himself up in bed. "And all your friends have confirmed?" "Of course," she said. "They know better than to ignore the niceties. Why, I believe Carrie did that once, and wasn't she ever so embarrassed to show up without a seat at the table?" "That she was," her father smiled and then winced. Florence's smile dropped in an instant. "Are you sure you're all right, father?" "Of course, I am, dear girl," he responded, his expression clearing again. "Now, what do you have planned for the rest of the afternoon?" "Just some reading," she said. "Perhaps a walk in the garden. I was hoping to take my tea there with you." "Tomorrow," he promised her. "Don't let me interrupt your reading." "But father," she protested. He reached up to pat her cheek, as if she were still a small child. "Go on, now." Florence had always been obedient to him, and today was no different. She got up from her chair and headed back downstairs, resolutely pushing aside her worry. Chapter 2. The clock chimed 2 o'clock, their standard tea time, and there were scones already laid out on the white table beyond the parlor window. She decided not to allow herself to dwell on her father's discomfort. She chose to believe that he was only feeling a bit poorly. After all, he had never lied to her before, and she had no reason to believe he was lying now. Dr. Lorry was not only the best doctor but the most experienced doctor in Boston, and she had complete faith in him. The doctor arrived half an hour later, and she waved to him from the top of the porch where she had been waiting. He tied his horse to the hitching post at the base of the wide stairs and headed to her. Florence led him inside, although she got a stern look for the doorman who was expected to do such tasks. She did allow the maid to take the doctor to her father's room upstairs. She expected Dr. Lorry to come down within a few minutes, with a smile on his face and simple instructions waiting to be followed. But as the minutes ticked by, worry crept back into Florence's heart. More than once, she had to stop herself from going upstairs, but she knew her father would want his privacy. As it was, nearly an hour passed before the doctor came back down the stairs. His face was gray, and his expression grave. When he looked at Florence, he swallowed deeply. "I am so sorry, my dear," he said. "You're sorry?" she asked, confused. "For what?" "I'm afraid there was nothing I could do." Florence's throat tightened and her hands began to shake. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice rising. "What do you mean?" "He just has indigestion, I'm afraid your father has suffered an attack of his heart," Dr. Lorry said gently. "When I got upstairs, he was just at the tail end of it. There was nothing I could do. Even if he was in a hospital, it would have taken a miracle to bring him back." "Bring him back?" Panic seized her. "What do you mean, bring him back? What are you saying?" Dr. Lorry reached a hand to her shoulder. "I am so sorry, dear Florence. But I'm afraid your father has passed away." "What?" No, that can't be right," she stammered, fighting the black spots that swirled at the edge of her vision. He just. "You can go up and see him," Dr. Lorry said. "Perhaps it will bring you comfort to say your final goodbyes now." "But he can't be dead," Florence cried. "He can't be. Her crying brought the attention of the household staff, who came from all directions. When they realized what had taken place, they all stepped back in silent reverence. Florence threw herself into Mary's arms. "Say it isn't so," she begged the maid. "Please, say it isn't so. He can't be gone. He's all I have. Mary stroked her hair gently. "Death visits all of us, my dear," she said, softly. "Sometimes, it is a welcome friend, and sometimes a dreaded enemy. But no matter how we think of it, it will come." Florence looked up the stairs with tear-filled eyes. She needed to go up there. She needed to see him. Maybe if she went up, she'd find out that Dr. Lorry was wrong. Of course, Dr. Lorry was wrong. He had to be. Her father would be sitting up in bed, smiling at her, laughing at his little joke. Mary stifled a sob, and Florence stiffened. She drew away from Mary and bit her lip. "I don't know how to live without him," she mumbled. "I've never lived without him. I don't know how to. I'm sure this is all a mistake." Her voice caught on a sob. "You'll be all right," Mary assured her. "Your father raised you to be brave and strong. I know those lessons won't fail you now." Florence shook her head over and over, still staring up the stairs. When had the stairwell gotten so long? There didn't used to be so many steps, surely. And how could her father be gone when he was alive and well just hours ago? He had just been speaking to her, talking about a dinner party that she was now sure she would never have. She swallowed hard and gripped the railing, forcing herself to mount the stairs. She could barely see through her tears, but she kept going, one step at a time. When she reached the hallway, she squared her shoulders, bracing herself. Her father's room was the first on the left. The door was open. She walked over and stood in the door frame, looking inside. Her father's dear face was covered with a sheet. She sucked in her breath. Her lips trembled as she gazed at his still form. She couldn't go in. She simply couldn't. If she went in, if she pulled back the sheet, if she looked at her father's face, she would have to admit it was true. Her father was gone. She walked to her own room and caught sight of Pride and Prejudice sitting on her bedside table. The setting sun cast a beautiful ray of light across the thick rugs on the floor. Florence, however, focused only on the book, sitting marked with a flower on the edge of the table. She would never read it again. She could never pick it up and go back to a time when everything was perfect, and she was happy. She couldn't picture being happy ever again. She pressed her hands to her throat and tried to keep breathing. At least she had the house, she thought. She had the house. She turned back toward her father's room and gathered up all her courage. She stepped through his door and approached his bed. Yes, at least she had the house and the people in it, to remember him by. Without that, she would be truly lost forever. Chapter 3. It was the worst week of Florence's life. Going from planning a dinner party to planning her father's funeral, all alone, made her feel as if her entire soul was collapsing. Every day, she woke up thinking that she needed to tell him something. Every day, she found something that she wanted to show him. But every time she turned to find him, she remembered that he was no longer there. She wrote to friends and family that they hadn't heard from in years, and her heart wrenched every time she wrote the words she never wanted to write. She tried to find different ways to break the news, but it never got any easier. The funeral was torturous. Seeing their friends and distant family swarming around with teary eyes, wanting to ask her questions, trying to cheer her up and invade her privacy, made her want to scream and run away. But she didn't. She controlled herself, and she sent them all away with hard-won composure. Not that she had any family close enough to care to stay with her. All she could think of the entire day was that her father was gone, and he was never coming back. She spared no expense for the funeral, getting all the things he would have found amusing and beautiful. She ordered beautiful flowers, asked for the best of everything, and had a new black gown made for herself. It was a far cry from the party dress she wanted, but she knew her father would have wanted her to look her best and feel like she was still his princess. It was a somber gown, and the veil dropped down over her face, hiding her tears from the large congregation. Now, everyone was finally gone, but for the servants. Miss, the butler showed up in the garden where she was sitting. These letters came just now for your father. Should I? I'll take them, she said, with shaky hands. She felt like she had cried an ocean and there were no more tears left. But seeing his name on the front of the letters made her gulp and wipe more tears from her face. She thought they were just going to be his typical business letters, from partners who hadn't heard the news. She opened them without paying much attention to the return labels, assuming she was going to have to break her heart again and answer more letters in the next few days. Overdue, 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 overdue. All the letters were notices of overdue payments. Florence's heart nearly stopped as she tried to read through tear-blurred eyes. These were accounts that he hadn't paid, bills that had apparently been due for months and months. Some of them stated it was the third, fourth, or final notice before legal action would be taken. The last one was a statement of accounts from his bank. To her absolute shock, and if she could be trusted to read it correctly, her father's bank account appeared overdrawn. Florence gaped at the pile of letters in her lap. There must be some mistake. Or had someone robbed them? She stared again at the bank statement. If it were true, it meant she had no way to pay the bills, no way to pay for the funeral, and no way to pay for her own upkeep. Are there any more like this? She asked the butler who was standing some distance away. Letters that look like this? Did my father keep them anywhere in particular? Perhaps his desk, miss? Your father was most private with his financial affairs. She didn't give wait to hear another word. She flew into the house and up the stairs. She almost got caught twice on her skirts as she ran up the spiral staircase. She shoved open the oak door to his room, and stopped, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't been in there since he had died. The curtains were open, the bed was made, and his clothes were still laid out from the day he had passed. If she didn't know any better, she might think he'd walk in at any moment. Except that he would never walk in again. Florence swallowed, trying to get a hold of herself, and then moved toward his desk. With trembling hands, she undid the latch and began to search through the papers that he had perfectly filed. It couldn't be true, it just couldn't be. He had always encouraged her to get the best, and he had never said no to any of her requests. They threw lavish dinner parties, he was generous with gifts, and he would rather buy something than have it mended or patched. She remembered getting some dirt on the hem of her dress and then ripping it a bit as a child, and he simply bought her a new one rather than having it mended and laundered. With growing horror, she saw that it was true. He kept very detailed notes. She could see the money started to leave the account in rivers during the last 2 years, and she could see nothing much replacing it. He had made several business deals that hadn't panned out, and investments that had robbed him blinded. The servants hadn't been paid in a month, and she was surprised that none of them had said a word about it. Most of them had been with the family since Florence was a child, and she considered them an extension of her own blood. She couldn't imagine life without them, but judging by the accounts, they had every right to walk away from her without a backward glance. Her father was ruined, beyond ruined. He was in debt to several people, and if Florence tried to draw money from any one of his accounts, she would find herself denied. No, 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 she repeated, as she pawed through the letters. Fresh tears began to spill over her face. Father, what am I supposed to do now? Tell me what I'm supposed to do. The glaring silence in the room was a stark reminder that he was never going to answer her again. Florence put her head down on the desk and began to cry. Her head throbbed, and her stomach churned. The sun was setting, giving the room a chill that sank into her. The bills for the funeral would be coming soon. The servants would surely expect to be paid. The house was a massive expense, and the gardens probably cost triple any servant's wage. Florence had received the best education, and she had excelled at mathematics. She thought she would never have to use such skills, but as her world plunged into darkness, she realized that this was the moment that could break her. With quivering hands, she reached for a quill and turned over the notice of accounts. She worried that if she didn't find a way to pay her father's debts, she could possibly be carted off to jail in his place. After all, she was his next of kin. The dress she was wearing was worth a tidy sum, even used. The oaken desk she was writing on could easily fetch a good price. Slowly, Florence began to amass a list of everything that had worth in the house. The number she needed was massive, and she was guessing at most of the values. But as she wrote, she gained energy and strength. Somehow, she found the courage and grit to get up and assess each room. She worked vigorously into the night, calculating everything from the chest in the dining room to each dish. And then finally, she wrote down what she thought the house was worth. Afterward, she began the tedious task of adding it all up. It was more than her terror of going to jail. She didn't want her father's good name sullied. Everything he worked hard for in life would be tarnished if he was known to be a debtor. It took hours to get everything completed, and she triple-checked her work. She found it heartbreakingly ironic that her expensive education was now being used to dig the estate out of debt. If her father hadn't insisted on giving her the best of everything, she might not be in this position now. This is my fault, she muttered to herself, as she calculated the sums. This is my fault. Father, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The sun was rising when she came up with the final number. It was a stretch, but if she sold everything at 3/4 of what she calculated it to be worth, she could pay off his debts. But it would mean that there was absolutely nothing left for her. Florence fell into her bed at dawn, her mind reeling. Could she really do this? Could she really sell every piece of her childhood and every memory of her father, to pay off the debts that he wasn't around to honor? It was as if her childhood, indeed her very life, had died with him. She closed her eyes, begging sleep to take her as the sun rose. Soon, her bed wouldn't be here. Her room wouldn't be here, for her at least, and her warm pelt blanket wouldn't be here either. Everything she knew was going to be gone. Her father would want her to be brave. He would want her to see it as an adventure, rather than a heartbreaking disaster. Yet she felt like she might disappear into nothing if she carried it through. Chapter 4. In the days that followed, Florence wandered the house as if she were a ghost. She didn't eat, she barely slept, and she didn't say a word to anyone. The servants clucked with worry, but she brushed them off with the wave of her hand. Her eyes no longer sparkled, and her peals of laughter no longer graced the gilded hallways. When the funeral bills began to appear, Florence knew that she had no other choice. The mathematics that she had calculated finally had to be tested. When the last round of bills arrived, she walked down to the servant quarters, a place she rarely saw. Everyone looked up in shock from their breakfast. Rarely had the master or mistress graced the lower floor with their presence, even when Florence was a child. It was a place for the servants to relax, a place to be away from work for a moment. "I'm so sorry to bother you, I know you are dining. Her voice trembled. "I wanted to thank you all for your work. You've done such a good job over the years, and I regard many of you as family. And since you're family, you should know I would never do this unless I had to. But, I'm going to have to let you all go. You'll receive your final pay packets as soon as I sell some." She couldn't finish her sentence. The tears came again, and she put her hands over her face, trying to get them to stop. The room was deathly quiet. "As soon as I sell some things," she finally managed to finish, when she could breathe again. "I don't know how long that will be, but I'll try to get it to you as soon as possible." "Miss Florence," said the housekeeper, "this is a very large house. You can't take care of it all yourself." "I know," said Florence. "I must sell it too. Everything has to go." No one said a word for a very long moment. And then the kind housekeeper Mary, who was like a mother to her, stepped forward. "Where will you go?" she asked. Florence shook her head. "I don't know. I really don't know. But I'll figure it out. I have to." "You will," Mary assured her, looking right into her eyes. "Your father raised you to be strong and brave and smart, like I said before. You will figure it out." "Thank you for having such faith in me," Florence said, right before she broke down in her housekeeper's arms. "But I'm not sure I have faith in myself anymore." Chapter 5. "I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm doing this. Can't believe I'm doing this," Florence repeated, over and over again. But somehow, repeating her disbelief didn't make the fact that she was standing outside a mail-order bride establishment in Boston any easier. After selling her father's estate, Florence had little choice for her future. She had enough money to get through the next 2 weeks and that was it. She knew that she would be useless in a factory, and she didn't really have any skills when it came to sewing or mending. Her father had always hired someone to do everything for her, and now she wished that she had learned differently. Over the past 2 weeks, for the first time in her life, Florence had learned hunger and cold. She had learned heartbreak, but she had also learned her own strength. If she couldn't do any sort of work, then there was only one more thing that she could do, and that was to give herself. Otherwise, she'd be a beggar in the street. Florence could barely look the matchmaker in the eyes as she sat down and gave the necessary details about her life. The woman made note after note about Florence's likes and dislikes, even about her height and general appearance. Florence's mouth was dry and her heart was pounding by the end of the interview. The woman then flipped through a giant book that she kept at the side of her desk, and spoke a single name. "Josiah Hart," she said. "Who is he?" "He's the man you're going to marry. He's exactly what you are looking for, and you are exactly what he is looking for." Should I write to him?" Florence asked, and the woman actually laughed. "Write to him? Oh no, dear. Not for this match. The man is eager. And writing takes time, which you don't have. The stagecoach leaves this afternoon. You're just in time for this one, so consider yourself lucky. It's a match made in heaven." "Just in time for what?" "To take the stagecoach to him," she said. "There are 4 other girls taking the coach out there. Majesty, Colorado is where you are heading." "Today?" Florence gasped. She couldn't just get on a stagecoach today and head off to marry someone with whom she hadn't even exchanged a letter. As soon as she had the thought, she stopped herself. Couldn't she? Everything else had fallen apart. What difference did it make if she did? This service was supposed to vouch for the men they represented. And what else was she going to do? "I'm sorry." "Right now?" Florence repeated, a bit more calmly. "Right now." The woman got up to get her some paperwork, including what appeared to be a ticket for the coach. "You can give them this, and it'll pay your journey. I would suggest that you gather up your belongings from wherever you are staying. The coach leaves from the center of town." Florence's mind raced. What if I don't get along with him? We're never wrong, dear, the woman said, with a smug smile on her lips. But in the event that we are, you can always leave. You'd have to pay for yourself, of course, but you could always leave. I really don't have any money, Florence said. So, I couldn't afford passage back. You'll like him, the woman said, her fleshy jowls wiggling. He owns a business and has quite a bit of money. You'll be taken of. But, Florence started and then realized she was out of excuses. Do you at least have a profile on him? If you insist, you can take this. The woman separated the information she had on Josiah from the rest of the book, and handed it over to Florence. He's perfect for you. Go on now. I can't believe I'm doing this, Florence repeated her mantra, standing up. Thank you. I think you'll like your traveling companions as well, the matchmaker said. Good luck, dear. Before Florence knew it, she was standing on the street, with all of her belongings in a small bag and her few remaining coins in her pocket. She was positive that this was the right meeting place, but the coach was supposed to have been there 10 minutes ago and there was no sign of it. Hello, came a voice to her left. She turned and found two identical women standing next to her. Both blonde with blue eyes and slim figures, the women wore green and blue dresses that suited their complexions. Are you waiting for the stagecoach, To go out west? Florence couldn't bring herself to speak about getting married quite yet. To find a husband, one woman cried excitedly and held out her hand. My name is Sarah. This is my sister, Kara. We're headed out west as well, and we're marrying two brothers. Oh, Florence said. That must be. You'll be together. That's nice. Yes, we're very excited, Kara said. It's such an adventure. Our family thought we had gone mad, but we have each other and there are no suitable matches here. What does your family think? I don't know, Florence said, and Sarah's mouth fell open. You didn't tell them? I don't, really have any family, Florence said, and their faces changed. Oh. I'm so sorry, Sarah said, and then she brightened. But your new husband will be your family, won't he? And I'm sure you'll have lots of children, and all will be well in just a year or so. I suppose, Florence said. I'm sorry if I seem a little less enthusiastic. I just applied this afternoon and now I'm standing here. To be honest, I'm not sure if this is the right choice for me. What's your other choice? Kara asked. None, I guess, Florence answered. Then it is the right choice. Look, there's Sylvia. She turned to wave to another woman approaching them with a small case in her hand. We met her in the office when we applied a few months ago. I'm glad she's in the same coach as us. Sylvia, come and meet Florence. Florence didn't know whether to feel overwhelmed or relieved by the growing group. She had no idea how far it was to Majesty, Colorado, but the women seemed friendly enough. They were joined by a fourth, a small woman called Anne, just as a stagecoach pulled up. Here we go, Kara said with a wide grin as she got in first, hardly waiting for some passengers to disembark. Off to a new adventure. Are you always so certain? Florence asked her, as she took a seat across from her. The stagecoach was clearly well used, and the seat was worn out, with part of the straw stuffing coming through right under Florence's left thigh. She shifted, trying to move her leg off of it, but it seemed impossible once the others piled in. I suppose I am, Kara said. I just don't see any point in being upset about things. Every day is a new adventure, and there are some who don't get another day. We should be blessed by each sunrise. Florence cast her gaze out the window as she thought of her father, cold in the graveyard. She bit her lip to stop tears from flowing as the coach started to roll down the street. Does anyone have a handkerchief? Anne spoke up, only her second sentence since she joined them. Florence had one in her bag and reached to hand it over just as Anne tried to stifle a sneeze. It wasn't entirely successful, and her small body let out a louder sneeze than anticipated, breaking the short silence. Anne turned bright red, taking Florence's handkerchief and closing her eyes. For a long moment, no one said anything. And then Kara giggled and Sarah joined in. They say if you hold in a sneeze, you could damage your eyes, Sylvia said to Anne. So, it's good that you didn't. You could. Really? Anne said, her eyes widening. I didn't know. I hold them in all the time, and I feel like I'm always ill. So far, your eyes look fine, Sylvia said. So, don't fret. How do you know such things? Sarah asked her. Sylvia shrugged. I read it in a medical textbook. My father is a doctor. Your father is a doctor? Sarah said. Then what are you doing here? I didn't want to be the doctor's daughter the rest of my life, Sylvia said, as if it were simple. Florence glanced at her and Sylvia smiled. Not that my relationship with my father is torn, by any means. He told me to forge my own path, and so here I am. You're very brave, Kara said. If our father were a doctor, I think we might have stayed home. Each of the women were different enough to keep the conversation flowing as the journey went on. It was a long journey and not even optimistic Kara could say that it was comfortable. The seats became harder and harder with each day, and sleeping seemed to be near impossible. The dust thrown up from the stagecoach covered their faces and clothing, and when they did stop for the nights, it was never long enough for them to get clean or feel refreshed. They bonded over their excitement and nervousness to meet their new husbands, but also their fears of living a life so different from what they'd known. Sarah and Kara were to marry farmers, while the other three were to marry businessmen who had gone west for the opportunity. Florence read in Josiah's profile that he owned a barber shop and had a nice home over the shop. He had come from a wealthy family, and gone west to forge his own path. His interests seemed similar to hers and his physical attributes seemed to be agreeable to what she pictured her future husband might look like. As the journey went on, Florence distracted herself from the discomfort by thinking about what she might say to him when they arrived. But nothing prepared her for the sight of him when she finally, days later, tumbled out of the stagecoach to find him waiting. The matchmaker had mentioned that she would send a telegram ahead to let him know that he was to expect his bride. Florence had spent the last hour saying goodbye to the other girls and fixing herself up as best she could as they rattled along on the jetted road. But no matter what ribbon she could tie in her hair, she paled in comparison to Josiah's tall, broad-shouldered good looks. He had sculpted cheekbones and a strong jawline. His eyes were piercing green against his dark hair and tan skin. He looked like a hero out of a fairy tale in which the hero rode in to save the damsel in distress. Looking into his eyes, Florence just about forgot her own name. Are you Florence? He asked her and she nodded, dumbly. I'm Josiah. It's so nice to meet you, she managed at last. Thank you for meeting me. Of course, he said. He had a kind smile, and she could see by his hands, which were shaking slightly, that he was just as nervous as she was. I wanted to start things off on the right foot if we're going to get married. Right. Married, she said, still in disbelief. Welcome to Majesty. He picked up her suitcase. I hope you'll like it here. I hope I will too, she managed and his smile widened. There was something about the way he looked at her that made her blush, her heart fluttering. Maybe, just maybe, things would be all right after all. Chapter 6. This is all yours? Florence looked up at the large barber shop in the town center, built below the large living area that sprawled over it. She was used to grand manor houses, of course, but this was quite impressive in its own way, given that Josiah had to have planned it himself. It was in impeccable condition from what she could see, with a new coat of paint and steps that were cut from fresh wood. Despite the fact that it wasn't as large as the house that she had come from, there was a certain charm about it. All mine, he answered, as they stood outside. And hopefully, yours as well. Oh, I mean, for some reason, she kept forgetting that they were going to be married and bound together for the rest of her life. Josiah was very handsome, and he was easy enough to talk to. She had treated their journey to his barbershop like she was making a new friend. They chatted about shared interests and the weather, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary about their conversation, until now. I was thinking, he said to her, that I could show you around a bit. But I want to do things proper like. I want this to be right, so until our wedding, I got you a room just up the road. I'm not going to stay here, she asked, feeling enormous relief at his words. Not until we're married, he clarified. There is a boarding house up the road, and it's real nice. The couple who run it is friends of mine and they have promised to give you only the very best. I see, she said. That way, we can take some time to get to know each other, he said. I'd be pleased to take you out to the cafe here. They got apple pie that will make you think you done gone to heaven. Florence smiled at that. She did like apple pie, and her stomach was growling after several days in the stagecoach without a hot meal. That would be lovely, she said at last, and he smiled. Let's get on with it, then, he said, pushing open the door. The barber's shop was as tidy and neat inside as it was outside. There were 3 chairs set against the right side of the wall, and the floor was swept clean of any offending hair. There were several tools laid out on a tray, polished and gleaming, and a wide mirror across the wall. Florence gasped at the sight of herself and immediately reached up to fix her hair. I'm so sorry, she cried when she saw how her curls had fallen. The girls said I looked all right, but... He smiled kindly at her and did not rush her. I think you look right nice, he said. If I went out in Boston looking like this, she trailed off, half embarrassed and half amused. Folks out west aren't as concerned about appearances, he assured her. Truly, you look fine. I appreciate your kindness, she said, finally satisfied with her hair. She turned around to survey the rest of the shop and found herself staring at a cot on the left-hand side. What's that for? She asked, confused. She didn't have much experience with barber shops, but she was pretty sure there wasn't supposed to be a bed in the middle of the space. For one horrifying moment, she thought he perhaps slept there, and this was truly to be her future home. Oh, he said with a shrug. There's only one doc in town, and he's often called away, sometimes for days. I have no medical training, but I have skill with a blade, so occasionally I do some of the smaller things. Oh my, she said, impressed, as he led her to the back of the shop where he pushed aside a cloth, and she saw a stairway. My lady, he said, and she giggled. He was quite the gentleman, it seemed, despite his rustic surroundings. She went up the stairs first and he followed her. His home above the shop was cozy and well laid out, which surprised her, given that he was a bachelor. It had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a dining area that overlooked town square. Florence was drawn to the large window, looking out on the busy street below. He joined her after he put down her bag, his hand brushing against her. He hadn't touched her purposely, but she felt shivers go up her spine just the same. This is my favorite spot, he said. Especially in the mornings. I like to just watch the world go by for a bit. I used to do that, she said. In Boston, our home was just off the main road, and I could see. She stopped talking, a lump forming in her throat. Josiah must have caught the look on her face and he reached up as if to comfort her, but he seemed torn on what was appropriate. Eventually, he settled for dropping his hand to take hers. I want to tell you how much I appreciate you coming all the way out here, he said softly. Their eyes met, and she felt a sense of security wash over her. I know it was a long journey, and I know it'll be a big change for you. You're brave, Florence, and strong. She felt a large tear drip down her cheek. I don't know if I'm either of those things, she said. I'm sorry, it's just that my father died right before I left. He was all I had. That must be awful hard for you, Josiah said, kindly. I sure am sorry for your loss. If you ever need someone to listen to you or the like, let me know. Chapter 7. Coupled with his good looks, Josiah's kindness won her heart in the following days. Despite the fact that she spent her nights in the nearby boarding house, which was quite nice as he promised, Florence spent every other moment at Josiah's side. He closed the barber's shop for a few days, ignoring the good-natured protests of the town folks, to take her to lunches at the local cafe and late afternoon picnics by the lake. He also took her for walks at the edge of the nearby forest. They stopped in at the shops that were surprisingly well stocked, even though to her, they seemed to be at the end of the world. All the proprietors were delighted to meet her. Florence felt warmly welcomed by all the town, and she basked in their friendly smiles and good-natured teasing. By the 5th day in the town, she felt comfortable going out on her own for small errands, while Josiah took care of customers who claimed they couldn't wait another day for a shave and haircut. It was while she was alone, walking down the street, that she heard the first whispers. There was a group of women standing on the street corner, their heads leaning in, talking quietly to each other. Florence smiled at them, as she did to each new person she met, expecting smiles in return. But oddly, they didn't smile back. Instead, they ignored her, continuing to whisper loudly to each other. Doesn't know what she's getting herself into. Probably wants her money so he can make falsehoods against someone else. Heartless. Florence was confused by the comments she overheard. There was no doubt that they were directed at her, as the women kept glancing at her out of the corner of their eyes. However, they made no other attempt to acknowledge her, and in fact, turned their back on her entirely. Florence had no plans to mention it to Josiah, as she didn't want to assume anything about strangers. She would have dismissed it as her overactive imagination, except for the fact that a similar incident took place 2 days later, when she was alone again. And then, 2 days after that, she saw the look someone gave Josiah when they entered the local cafe for lunch. One man bowed in a mocking way to Josiah after he walked in. "Pardon me," he said, his voice heavy with sarcasm. He brushed past Josiah a little too harshly as he walked out. In confusion, Florence craned her neck to watch him go. "What was that about?" she asked, but Josiah kept his arm firmly in hers. His jaw looked hard, and the sparkle had left his eye. "Nothing," he said. "Pay no attention to him." But, she searched for the right words. "I saw him standing with the others the day before yesterday. I could have sworn that he was whispering about me, but I thought I was imagining things. I don't want to give you the impression that I'm a gossip, but—" "Just ignore him, Florence," Josiah said, cutting her off. "There are some people in this town who have chosen the wrong idea." It was the first time she'd heard him say anything harsh about anybody, and it surprised her. Her first days in town had been full of warmth and welcoming glances. Why had things changed? Josiah seemed in a faraway mood the rest of the day, and Florence retired to her boarding house room early that night. She tried to dismiss the incidents as nothing, but suspicions were starting to grow in her mind. There had to be something he wasn't telling her. Still, despite these worrying incidents, she wrote letters singing his praises to the ladies she had met in the stagecoach. All of them were settled in their new locations, and they sent letters back and forth, mostly discussing daily life and the new joys they were discovering. Everyone seemed happy, and it became almost a contest of who would actually marry first. They all promised to attend each other's weddings, and Florence hoped that they were promises that would be kept. Early that next morning, it was her wedding that she was dreaming about. The bed in the boarding house was quite comfortable, and Florence was lying there half asleep, imagining her marriage ceremony. She pictured walking down the aisle in a beautiful gown of white lace toward Josiah, with Cara and Sarah and there to celebrate with her. In her thoughts, the local church was decorated to all its splendor, with flowers of all colors and beautiful candles. But all of a sudden in her dream, one of the candles started to rattle, and then another and another. They vibrated in their holders, making a clunking noise that seemed unnatural. Florence's dream twisted into an ugly scene and she jerked away, sitting up with a gasp. It wasn't the candles in her imagination vibrating. It was the handle to her bedroom door. Suddenly, there was a large thunk, as if someone were throwing themselves against the door, but it held firm, and then the handle rattled again. Florence drew the covers up around her, frozen with fear. She grasped the blankets and squeezed her eyes shut, whispering a prayer of safety. It was clear that this wasn't the landlord, nor was it someone trying to be friendly or perhaps mistaking which room was theirs. Someone was trying to break in. It only continued for a few more moments, and then it stopped, but it was enough to terrify Florence. As soon as the dawn broke, she got dressed, and cautiously peered out her door, making sure there was no one standing nearby. As soon as the street was light, she practically ran outside, bursting through the door of the barber shop just as Josiah was setting up. "Tell me what's going on," she cried, startling him. He dropped his broom in surprise, spinning around. "Florence?" he asked, crossing the floor to her. "What's the matter?" "Tell me what's going on," she repeated, and recanted what had happened to her the night before. His face turned red as she spoke, and his fists clenched. "I know that there is something happening in this town. People whisper about me on the street, and there was that man in cafe, and now this. What is happening?" "I think we should get married as soon as possible," Josiah said, his voice terse. "I don't like this idea of you there in that boarding house." "What?" she questioned. Hadn't he claimed the boarding house was the best place for her to stay? How in the world was she to marry him now when she had no idea what kind of past he had? "Why are these people acting like this toward you and me? What have you done?" "Florence," he began, but she cut him off. "No," she said, at last. "I can't marry you until I know what's happening. I want the entire story." He took a deep breath, as if choosing his words carefully. When he did speak, it was calm and measured. "It's because I tried to be a decent human being," he said, at last. "And sometimes, that isn't rewarded in this world." She was taken aback at his answer. "Whatever do you mean?" she asked, in a gentler tone. "I lent a good deal of money to some people in town," he said. "There was a large family building a homestead, and they were really struggling. The Hardens. Maybe I was an idiot, but I took out a loan against my business to help them. I didn't want any interest on it, I only wanted it paid back within 5 months. They agreed to it. 5 months is long gone. But every time I ask, they deny being able to repay it, despite the fact that their homestead is doing right good now. I began to hear rumors that they was going into the big city to gamble away what's mine. Jess Harden was going, anyway. I bided my time, trying to confirm the rumors. When I finally found out it was true, everything broke down. They accused me of trying to rob them and of being cruel, and it just fell apart. They got lots of people believing them, not me. I'm sorry that I didn't tell you before. I hoped you wouldn't have to even learn about it. It hasn't exactly divided the town, and since I'm the only barber here, folks have no choice. But it hasn't made things easy. I put a bit more pressure on them when I learnt you were coming because I wanted to build the best life for you. I reckon I made things worse. I'm sorry." She saw clearly that his eyes held nothing but the truth. For a long moment, she said nothing. He hadn't exactly lied to her, but he hadn't told her the whole truth either. If this was going to be the basis for their marriage, it wasn't a good start. She knew that she was within her moral rights to leave. And worse, she knew that he wouldn't blame her if she did. She could leave and never look back. But where would she go? She had no other place to call home anymore. And, looking into Josiah's eyes, she didn't want to go anywhere else. She had started to care for him deeply, despite all of this. His gaze on her remained steady. And full of hope. She took a long, deep breath. "You did the best you could," she said softly. "I believe your side of things. These past few days, I have come to know you as a good and honest man. You are kind-hearted, and think of others before yourself. If those people can't find it in their hearts to repay you, then one day they will answer before a higher judge. But I'm not happy that you kept the whole truth from me. I need you to promise me that you won't withhold information from me in the future." Josiah's eyes misted over, and he gave her a look of such affection that her throat tightened with emotion. "I won't. I promise." He took a gulping breath. "So, you'll stay?" "Yes. I will stay." Chapter 8. If someone had told Florence a year ago that she would be out in the West in a beautiful wedding gown, getting married in a church to a near stranger, she would have told them that they were crazy. When she was a little girl, Florence had dreamed of her wedding day in so many different ways. There was a small private church ceremony with her prince, there was a large party in her beautiful home, there was a massive service in the high-calling church she had grown up in. Foolishly, she'd also dreamed that there was a parade in the street, with her in the middle in a white carriage, a wide smile on her face and several white horses leading the way. But always, no matter how the wedding played out, there was her father walking her down the aisle. She missed him so much on some days that there weren't words she could use to express herself. What got her through her wedding was the knowledge that he was looking down on her and smiling from heaven. She had been the apple of his eye, and she knew that somehow, in some way, she still was. Life was very different from how it had been when she lived in Boston, but she was happy and she had managed to take care of herself. By what she now considered a miracle, she had found a handsome prince fit for a fairy tale, and she was about to start a whole new life with him. "Are you ready, my dear?" A knock at the door came, and she spun around, her veil obscuring her view. One of the kindly old ladies from the church who had stood guard at the door for the last few moments, was preventing anyone from entering the bridal changing room. She looked upon Florence. "Are you sure you don't want anyone to walk you down the aisle?" "No. I'm ready," Florence told her. "And I'm sure. I know that my father is here in spirit." Her friends from the stagecoach were in the congregation, excited and willing to support her, which went a long way to calm her nervousness. "I'm sure your father is here in spirit, dear." The woman smiled. "It's a comforting thought, ain't it? Well, if you are ready, everyone else is." "Is Josiah here?" Florence asked, and the woman chuckled. "Yes, he's here," she said. "Was you worried? What would you have done if I said that he weren't here?" "I would have, well, ridden away for another husband." Florence said it as a joke, even though she knew that she would do no such thing. She and Josiah knew how their union had come to be, and they saw it as a blessing from God, even a sign. They were meant to be happy together. "Well, lucky, you have to do no such thing," the woman said, with another laugh. "Come along then. This way." Florence took one last look at herself in the mirror, with the lace gown covering her from neck to toes, and smiled. In some ways, she had been ready for this moment her whole life. The church was nearly full, and she could only see a handful of spare seats from her position just around the corner. It seemed that most of the town had come out, despite the gossiping tongues. This was her life now, and she couldn't wait for it to officially begin. She heard the organ music and took a deep breath, taking her bouquet as it was handed to her. She drew up her skirt. Slowly, just as in rehearsal, she rounded the corner and began to walk in time to the music. Some of the congregation reached out to touch her lightly, for luck, and offered her smiles and blessings as she passed by. Had it been another day, she would have smiled back and thanked them. But today, she could not tear her eyes away from Josiah, standing at the front of the church in a well-tailored suit. He looked trimmer than she had ever seen him, which made her smile. She would make sure to tease him about it later on. Right now, she couldn't get to him fast enough. When she finally got to him, she held out her hands and he took them with a wide smile. "Hello, my love," he whispered. "Are you ready to start the rest of our lives together?" "I have been ready almost since I arrived here in Majesty," she said. "Oh really?" he teased. "So, there weren't any bumps along the way?" "None," she said, and he chuckled softly before turning to the preacher and nodding his head. The preacher cleared his throat and opened the book in front of him, reading in a clear, loud voice as the rest of the congregation sat down. "Dearly beloved, we have come together in the presence of God to witness and bless the joining together of this man and this woman in holy matrimony. The bond and covenant of marriage was established by God in creation, and our Lord Jesus Christ adorned this manner of life by his presence and first miracle at the wedding in Cana of Galilee." Florence let the preacher's words sink deeply into her heart. She could hardly believe that she was standing there, getting married to this man she was growing to love. This man, who in these brief short days had already shown her his heart. Already treated her with such tenderness. Tears burned in her eyes. How she wished this man beside her could have known her father. How she wished her father could have known him. The preacher was still reciting. "Therefore, marriage is not to be entered into unadvisedly or lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." He stopped, looking between them, and Florence wondered if he was checking whether either of them was going to change their mind. She and Josiah glanced at each other again and smiled. They had come this far, and there was no way they were changing their minds now. The preacher cleared his throat and began speaking again. Into this union, Florence and Josiah now come to be joined. If any of you can show just cause why they may not be lawfully wed, speak now, or else forever hold your peace. She knew that nobody was going to say anything. Quite a few folks in town supported them, after all. But despite that, she looked nervously around. Josiah gave her hands a little tug, pulling her closer. "Nothing will tear you from me," he whispered. "I'm counting on that," she said. Florence, the preacher intoned, and she knew that vows were coming next. She was immensely glad that they hadn't been made to memorize these, because she never would have remembered them in such a state of emotion. Despite being incredibly happy, she was nervous standing up in front of the whole congregation. "Will you have this man to be your husband, to live together with him in the covenant of marriage? Will you love him, comfort him, honor and keep him, in sickness and in health, and, forsaking all others, be faithful unto him as long as you both shall live?" "I will," she said, half in disbelief that she actually got to say such words after having dreamed them most of her life. "Josiah, will you have this woman to be your wife, to live together with her in the covenant of marriage? Will you love her, comfort her, honor and keep her, in sickness and in health, and, forsaking all others, be faithful unto her as long as you both shall live?" "I will," he repeated, looking deeply into her eyes. Florence beamed. Josiah made her feel safe, taken care of, and loved. "Will all of you witnessing these promises do all in your power to uphold these two persons in their marriage?" The preacher turned his attention on the congregation. "We will," they chorused. Next, Josiah and Florence exchanged simple rings, and before they knew it, the preacher was pronouncing them man and wife. Chapter 9. "We're married," Florence said, in disbelief as they got ready for bed that night. Despite the fact that she had spent quite a few hours in his home, it seemed new to her. It was no longer just his home, now, it was hers, too. She could barely keep her eyes open, and she sank onto the bed, a tired smile spreading across her face. "We are married," he repeated. He looked at her and she could see how nervous he was. "Florence, well, I know we don't know each other real well yet." She looked at him, her eyes wide. What was he trying to say? "So, if you prefer, I can sleep somewhere else. You know, till you feel more comfortable." His cheeks turned red in the lamplight. He stood beside the bed, shuffling one foot back and forth over the braided rug. She was so full of love for him at that moment, that she nearly burst. How thoughtful he was. How considerate of her feelings. And he was correct, she was nervous. But it didn't seem right to sleep apart on their first night of marriage. She patted the bed beside her. "No, Josiah. You're my husband, and I'm your wife. We belong together." He made a soft moaning noise deep in his throat and cupped her face in his hands. Tenderly, oh so tenderly, he pressed his lips to hers. At first, Florence thought she was dreaming. She was too warm, and something felt like it had stung her face. Perhaps she was out in the sun, having a picnic where there were bugs. Perhaps they were walking along the lake. "Florence!" Josiah yelled, and she jolted upright in bed. She hadn't been dreaming at all. The window was shattered, and parts of the floor were engulfed in flames. She gasped, inhaling the tendrils of smoke that grew thicker with each moment. Josiah grabbed the blankets off of her, shoving her from the bed to the unburnt floor by the door. He stumbled backward, and she watched in horror as he fell into the flames. "Josiah!" she screamed. She scrambled back to the bed and yanked the blankets till they came free. Feverishly, she threw them over him, batting at them with her hands. She coughed as the smoke grew thicker. Tears coursed down her cheeks. She could barely focus. Josiah squirmed beneath the blankets, rolling closer to the door. "Josiah!" she screamed again as she beat on him. The flames grew smaller. She grabbed the pitcher of water from the bedside table and threw it on the floor that still burned. Josiah struggled to get up, tangled in the burnt blanket. She yanked a second blanket from the bed and threw it on the remaining flames on the floor. Together, they stomped and stomped until everything was out. "Are you all right? Are you all right?" Josiah cried. She gulped in air and coughed. The smoke began to settle and an early morning breeze from the broken window brought in much-needed fresh air. Her hands shook as she peeled the last pieces of blanket from Josiah. She shuddered at the burn marks along his shoulder and arm. The burns were bright red and some of his skin was black. Oh, Lord," she repeated. "This is the Harden family," he said, his face dark. "And this is the last time they harm us." "Sit down," she pleaded. He had to be in shock because he seemed oblivious to the pain of his burns. "Josiah, please. No. I love you. Stay here and stay safe." With that, he took off down the stairs, leaving her standing in a smoldering room with a burnt blanket. She rushed after him, but he was gone. She ran back upstairs, wanting to be sure the fire was completely out. In the morning shadows, she stood at the door of their bedroom and looked at the mess. Too much of her life had been determined by things she couldn't control. And here was yet another instance. She thought she had lost everything when her father died, but Josiah had shown her that she hadn't lost everything at all. She walked into the room, stepping carefully. The damage didn't seem to be as horrible as she first thought. And as far as she could see, they had gotten the fire completely out. "Josiah," someone called. There was banging on the shop door. Florence ran downstairs again. Their neighbor, Billy, stared at her, his eyes wide. He had clearly been awakened by the commotion. "Get the sheriff," she told him. "Please." "What happened? Where's Josiah?" "You all right?" he asked, firing the questions at her. "We're all right. Just please, get the sheriff," she said. "Send him to the Hardens. And I'm taking your horse." Florence had never been so forceful in her life. But she would not go through another loss so quickly on the heels of the loss of her father, she was certain of that. Billy nodded, wordlessly. He ran for his horse and she followed him, hoisting herself onto his old mare. It would be no match for Josiah's horse, but she had to try. She had no idea what Josiah would do when he got to the Hardens' homestead. But she'd never seen such anger in Josiah's eyes before. She had to stop him from doing something foolish. She had to. She was grateful that she had questioned Josiah about the homestead he had helped. If she hadn't, she wouldn't know the way. If she got to the Hardens in time, maybe she could defuse the situation. And if Josiah didn't make it there because of his injuries, she wasn't going to leave him lying somewhere in terrible pain. "Dear Father," she murmured, as the mare lurched forward. "Dear Father, please be with me." It was as much of prayer to her earthly father's spirit as it was to her heavenly Father. She tried to find the strength that her father had given her. He had taught her to be strong, to use her head rather than her heart. Right now, though, it was her heart that was leading her toward the homestead. The only thing that she could be grateful for was the fact that she didn't find Josiah lying in the dirt along the way. The ride to the homestead was long, and she wasn't used to riding without a saddle. Her hands ached and her thighs felt like they would give in, but she continued to grip the horse. She could see people as she approached the homestead and she slowed slightly. Josiah's large black horse was standing against the horizon, and Josiah, and who she assumed was Mr. Harden, were approaching each other with a force she knew she couldn't interrupt. Neither man seemed aware of her careful approach. "How dare you?" Josiah roared. "On my wedding night of all nights? I'm sorry. Did I ruin things?" Mr. Harden asked, his voice cold. "The way you ruined our lives when you spread rumors about us." "I wanted my loan back as agreed, nothing more, nothing less," Josiah said. "You were the one who lied when I did you a kindness." "You'd rather have my wife and children starve?" Mr. Harden said. "I'll make sure your new wife will starve when I am done with you." Florence nearly screamed when she saw Mr. Harden pull a gun. He pointed it at her new husband. She saw Josiah's steps falter, and she realized that the burns were getting the best of him. His knees quaked, and he almost plummeted before he righted himself. "Stop," she cried, startling them both. A shot rang out into the pre-dawn air, and Josiah fell. No! Florence jolted down from her horse, racing to where Josiah fell. No, no, please no. Her voice cracked as she rushed toward him. Mr. Hardin didn't move, looking stunned. Josiah lay on the ground, dead still, as Florence reached his side. Don't move, came a voice, and she whirled around. Was it over? Was this how they would both meet their maker? It wasn't another Hardin family member, tough. It was the sheriff, sitting on his horse with a look of extreme annoyance on his face. His gun was pointed into the air, and Florence realized that Mr. Hardin hadn't shot his gun at all. Florence, Josiah wheezed and reaching up to squeeze her hand. I'm all right. I'm all right. You need a doctor, she said, relief roaring through her that there was no gunshot wound. We'll get you help. Won't we? She turned to the sheriff, terrified that they would be blamed for this mess. Right away, the sheriff assured her. And Hardin. Mr. Hardin's face looked torn between horror and sadness as he looked down at Josiah. Florence expected him to say something nasty, but his hands shook as he put his gun back into his holster. He then backed up, looking around as if planning his escape. It stops here, the sheriff ordered. Or I'll be putting you in jail. Mr. Hardin continued to back away. Yes, sheriff. And you'll be paying the man what you owe, the sheriff spit out at him. Yes, sheriff. Ada looked at Josiah again. I love you, Florence, he whispered to her, still grasping her hand. Everything is going to be all right. I promise. Florence bent over him and kissed his cheeks and his forehead. She glanced up between Mr. Hardin and the sheriff, and she thought she saw the outline of a third figure standing in the shadows. If she squinted, it could have been her father, standing there with a smile and a nod. She sucked in a long breath as her heart pounded wildly. She looked back at her husband. Yes. She touched Josiah's cheek. Everything is going to be all right. And she knew that she would never again be alone, for she had a wonderful new husband and the spirit of a dear father who would be with her forever. Now, let's get you that doctor, she said. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.